Hi folks, Will LR Workshop. I've stored this Defender outside in the UK for the last 7 years. And I'm currently going to start bringing it back into commission, bring it back onto the road. And in this video, I'm going to share with you some of the things I've done to try and keep it in as good a condition as possible. And bearing in mind, I've not gone for a heated garage here. I'm trying to do a cost-effective solution by basically using a storm force cover, and I'll go through some of the other bits I've done to the vehicle or considerations I've thought about. But essentially, storm force cover, this is on the third cover in 7 years. They do deteriorate. You can see they're starting to go there. But there's other videos about those. You can go and see those in the link above. I've been in there for a few weeks. What I would say about storing a Defender is if you're going through the process of thinking about storing it, you're probably going to end up storing it for a longer period of time than you would initially think. I didn't know how long this would be off the road, but it's turned into 7 years. Particularly if you're going to go overseas for work or something like that, you might not necessarily know how long that's going to be. I work overseas, so I know what that's like. My other Defenders off the road for up to 2 months at a time. So the difference is for that one, when I go overseas, I take the battery out and leave it on charge, but fundamentally I don't do much with the vehicle for that period of time, but I'll make sure I use it when I get back. But if you're going overseas long term, or if you don't know how long you're going to go away for, this video is probably more appropriate for those kind of situations. I mean, if you're storing a vehicle for up to 6 months and you know it's going to be that or less, then personally I wouldn't worry too much about that, unless it's like a proper concourse vehicle. Right, well, let's start with the front of the vehicle. So you see I've done a few changes here. I've specifically taken the bumper off, I've taken the front grille off, I've taken the plastic trim here. The reason the bumper is, it's very with this type of cover, it's very difficult to keep it dry. Water runs off and it pulls in the bumper. So I've elected to take it off because it was a brand new bumper when I put it on it. So it just helps a lot, and you bring the cover around. One thing that's important to note with these covers, water pulls in the corners. So I don't know if there's a position. So you see there, at the furthest, the lowest point where it tucks underneath, I put holes in it, and that just allows the water to drain. Because when that's kind of down here, water will pool in there, and particularly if there's a bumper in that, the bumper will sit in a pool of water that's caught at the bottom under the elastic. So I just elected to take the bumper off, stick a hole in it, and it sort of drains out around here. Taking the front panel, this is an AC grille on here, so it sticks out a bit further than normal, and I just didn't want I'd had this painted. It was relatively new paint when it went on. I didn't want it to rub through from the cover, but it seems to have done all right on the corners. There's not really any rubbing happening on the corners. And then I've taken the plastic trim off just because it fades. I didn't know whether the sunlight would get through, and over time it would fade, so I've just elected to take all that off. These black areas, the painted areas, I painted all these before I put the vehicle away, and I've been periodically rubbing them down with ACF. You'll see if there's few sort of rust spots starting to come through. I think that wouldn't be too difficult to rub that down and paint it again potentially. You do get a lot of condensation under here. It is quite sweaty. There's no particular airflow up through and around the vehicle, the engine bay. You can tell that from the number of cobwebs that get in here, and a lot of spiders make their home. There was a huge one down there. Used to be a huge spider living down there at the end. But yeah, there's not a lot of airflow, so it does get a bit sweaty. I painted this as well. You can see bits of surface rust on there. But I generally tend to, whenever I could, a couple of times a year, try and rub it down with ACF, the air filter as well, and the servo. In terms of servicing while we're here, I basically put it away with all new oils and fluids, so power steering fluid, brake fluid, clutch fluid, coolant, engine oil. The engine oil, I've changed it a couple of times. I probably could have changed it more frequently. I've not worried so much about it, just the fact that it's been sat for most of the time and not been used with the fresh engine oil. I mean, it's pretty clean in there. In terms of starting the engine, I would probably start it 2 or 3 times a year whenever I was near the vehicle. I didn't live next to the vehicle for all of that 7 years. So I would start the vehicle and run it up to temperature. Sometimes I got to run it around a field just to keep everything moving. And the belts will probably need replacing, to be honest, so they look okay. There's bits of aluminium corrosion on here, powdery stuff, but you can, if you care about it, you can get a polish. I've not done anything with the timing belt, but I think that's something I'm going to have to really consider. It's probably been 10 years So I'm going to have to do the timing belt as well, I think. I also test the coolant with a pH tester and the specific gravity, the balls that float as well, just to make sure it's still good. The brake fluid I test with a tester, and when it gets kind of, the moisture content gets quite high, then I'll replace all the brake fluid, and same with the clutch fluid. For the paintwork, you can see that it does get kind of cobwebby and just gets crud appearing on here. One particular place, because it doesn't stop all the water coming through, the windscreen does get a lot of crud and moss build up, and algae, that kind of stuff. Here's got a bit of stuff in there. So what I would do with the paintwork is clean it probably every 2 years. I would fully clean the vehicle. There's another video on that as well. And then polish, and then put sealant on the paint as well. But I'm pretty pleased with how it's come out. A lot of the damage you get with paintwork is, stone chips from using the vehicle, or UV damage from being directly in the sun, and that kind of stuff, and road tar and spots. So being undercover, the paintwork is pretty good, to be honest. One of the big considerations with leaving a vehicle is getting flat spots on the tyres. So I just got these as 40 quid set of kind of used crappy tyres, and I just stuck them on the vehicle. I basically just treat them like rolling axle stands. This one tends to go a bit flat. The other ones pretty much have kept the same level of air pressure for 7 years. But I don't worry about these at all. These will not be roadworthy tyres. With the cover on, it's not so easy to cover up the tyres and wheels. You'd probably need a separate arrangement for that. So I would just, assume that if you're going to store it for a very long time, probably sell the tyres, put some rubbish ones on, buy new tyres when you get it back on the road. I've got a good set of tyres to go onto this one. The alternative is sticking it on axle stands, 4 axle stands, just to keep the wheels off the ground. I did that on my other Defender when I stored it in the garage for 10 months. I kept it jacked up on axle stands just so there wouldn't be any flat spots. The downside of the garage in that situation was very little airflow, and the chassis noticeably degraded, a lot more rust underneath the vehicle from being kept in the garage, probably more than this one has in 7 years, just from 10 months in the garage. So tyres wise, I would just assume that they get written off. It's not too difficult to either jack it up or just take the tyres off and buy a used set. You probably spend 80 quid these days. So that's been a good thing, not to have to worry about this. These things are out in the elements and they just get corroded and rubbishy, and I don't have to worry about them. In terms of preparation, bodywork on the inside, I sprayed all of the bulkhead, all of the doors with dinitrile cavity wax. I took all the doors off, sprayed inside everywhere, inside all the B posts and the C posts and everywhere. I took the seals off and I sprayed in all the seams here as well. And then I've tended to, you can see that's a bit of greasy dirt come off there. I sprayed these down with ACF 1000, which is the clear one, and the same for under the doors. It does get, water will find its way into the doors and you'll get drips under here, either condensation. So these doors are pretty good, so it's worth sealing a bit under there. I also took the bulkhead matting because it does tend to get very sweaty up under here, so I've just taken the matting off to leave the bulkhead a chance to dry, and then I would leave a dehumidifier pack down in the footwell here specifically. Across the whole vehicle I would have about 7 dehumidifier packs. I'd have one there, one about here, one in the back there, one down here, one there, and probably one in the back as well. And they would fill up in about 6 to 9 months. The benefit of those is that moisture that they suck in, it would just stay in the vehicle otherwise. Things would get mouldy. This has been sitting for summer now and I did clean it, but the steering wheel would get very mouldy, the seats would kind of get a bit mouldy. You might be able to see, I haven't cleaned this one yet, there's a bit of a green tinge on there. That'll come off with some mould and mildew cleaner. It rubs up quite nicely. The footwell on the other side, because it's got the aircon unit, I can't actually get the bulkhead matting out very well, but I pull the mats up and sometimes I stick a dehumidifier down there as well, just to soak up the moisture. It does, Land Rovers leak apparently, so you do sometimes get pooling of water in here. So some of these bolts go a bit rusty. You can see I've got that one. That one's got stainless these have gone a bit rusty as well, and these are stainless. So stainless does actually work, but I'll be replacing these. You see that washer's actually sort of just crumbled there, so I'll be able to replace those quite easily. And then the other thing in here, battery. There's no battery in here at the moment, but I elected just to keep an old rubbishy battery in here. You'll see me changing it over when I got this vehicle moved to its current location. I didn't elect it. I just had that old one and just kept jump starting it, or sometimes I would take the battery from the other vehicle and stick it in. If you've got a place where you can leave the vehicle plugged in permanently with a trickle charger, then by all means keep the same battery, and it should last ultimately for a very long time. I didn't have a place to do that, so I didn't want to invest in a new battery until now, and I do have one. The headlining, I did clean this off originally. We've got a few kind of marks up here. There's a bit of mould on there, so I'll have to clean this off. Even when you've got the humidity dehumidifier packs, it does get a bit sweaty at the top there. But you can see the headlining. That's not sagging at all. That's as good as the day it came out of the factory almost. So I guess there's proof there that you leave it for a while and you can actually keep the headliner in good condition. And here's the main event, the chassis. So I dinitroed all in the chassis. This was originally this outer layer. I don't exactly know what it is, but it's very good. And that was put on by previous owners. So I just did all dinitro on the insides before it went away. So the chassis stays pretty dry, to be honest. All the water trickles off the underside. There's a lot of airflow under here. As you can see, there's cobwebs blowing in the breeze. So it stays pretty dry, to be honest. I've not really had any problems with it. The springs here are pretty rusty. They were rusty before they went away. I do have some other ones to go on. So it's really the state of the chassis hasn't really changed much from how it was when it first went in. Shock absorbers were already rusty, more or less. This is a stainless exhaust, which is getting a bit of rust on it now. The only thing to note in here is there was a bird's nest appeared in this area of the cross member, and I scooped it out when I made sure there weren't any eggs in it or anything. But other than that, there's, touch wood, there's not been any mice getting in anywhere, any mice damage or anything like that. I did wonder about blocking up the exhaust pipe, just in case there could be anything trying to get in there and live. But otherwise, transmission's got all full, new axle oil in there. I have greased prop shafts and things. I've actually replaced that UJ while it's been in storage. This has got an XN disc handbrake on it, which is fairly rusty. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that. Might have to replace it, or it might be fine. But fundamentally, prop shaft's got a few rust spots on it. It got undersealed a bit, but it's pretty good under here. But the key thing that we all think about are brakes. Brakes are pretty bad because they're naturally, just out in the open and it's bare metal. This vehicle was stored for about 3 years before I bought it, and so they were already in quite a bad state. It actually passed its MOT. I didn't think it would. So in the garage would have to replace the discs. But fundamentally, I've just known that I'm going to have to replace these and the calipers, which is what I've bought to replace. Look at all the cobwebs in here. It's crazy. So I'm basically going to replace all the brake components because it's going to be worth it. So that's just one less thing to worry about as well, knowing that I'd have to do that when I get it back on the road. You could potentially find a way, take the brake pads out, potentially grease up all the discs, do it that way, and then degrease it and put the brake pads in when you put it back on the road. But then the downside of that is you can't just roll the vehicle around if you've got no way of stopping it, unless you use a handbrake. But you could do it that way if you got over the tyre problem by just jacking it up on jack stands, taking the wheels off and being done with it. But having it, you could have it on jack stands and I guess start the engine and run it through the gears and whatever, but it is nice to be able to kind of actually roll it around with a bit of a load on it. So there's a few different ways of doing that, but I've keeping these rust free in good condition for a long time. I don't think it's possible. So these will be getting new brake discs and new calipers all round. As far as the fuel tank goes, the advice is always really to fill it. Thereby you've got the least amount of airspace possible, probably just this amount of airspace in the cross section of the filler pipe. And if you don't have water, so then condensation can't grow, you don't have the water, and diesel bug can't grow and contaminate the fuel. That's the theory. These are plastic tanks. I don't know how much condensation they make, probably less condensation than metal tanks. I didn't leave this filled. I've tipped bits of fuel into it over time, primarily for a cost reason. I didn't want to put in the amount of fuel into the vehicle to then have to waste it at some point in the future, potentially. So that's just me being a cheapskate up front, because I had bought this vehicle and I was quite low on cash in the 6 months after I bought it, and then put it into storage. That would be the ideal, I think. So here's what my plan is. I've not been too worried about the fuel situation for this reason. That is the sedimenter. So when I originally emptied the sedimenter, it having been sat for about 3 years, there was loads of snot and crap in here. So I was quite confident that the fuel sediment is going to catch all the crud. So diesel bug, creates some snotty algae sort of substance, and it was all in the bottom here. So this is what my plan is. I'm going to empty this, clean it out. I'm going to fill the tank. Hopefully that should smash up any diesel bug and kind of turn it into smaller bits. That can come suck through to here and collect in. Any smaller stuff that goes through goes into the fuel filter. Maybe after 20 miles of driving or a good amount of driving, I'll then change the fuel filter on the front if there's no problems at that stage. We'll see how that goes. Leave comments below about anyone who's been through this before. I really don't want to drop the tank, because I've dropped the tank twice on this vehicle already in the past. I'm pretty confident, because of the sedimenter, nothing nefarious and disgusting is going to find its way to the fuel injectors or the fuel pump. So that is how I've stored this Defender for the last 7 years. It might give you a bit of an overview of some of the things you need to consider if you're wanting to store your Defender for an extended period of time. Bear in mind, this is the way I did it. This is not advice. It may give you something to think about. You probably may have some things that you would do differently, and that's absolutely fine. There's certainly things I could have done better, or if I had more money, I would have done a bit differently with this vehicle. But I've lived in those last 7 years hundreds of miles away from where this is, and I only saw it a few times a year, and I was always trying to keep costs down a bit. So it's less than perfect. I mean, so what I'm going to do in the future, I think the only long-term solution for storing a Defender in a really good way is keeping them inside in a garage. This is in the UK, where you can control airflow and things like that, and humidity a bit better. That's my long-term plan with these vehicles, is to have them undercover in a garage, out of the elements. Water does still trickle through this vehicle. The fact that because it's got a cover on it, it's not under a hard standing. Anyway, if you want to know what actually happens with this vehicle when I get it back on the road, and how things pan out and my decisions affect the longevity and reliability of this vehicle, then subscribe to this channel to see what happens. Thanks for watching. Leave your comments below, as I'm sure you all will. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.